I sold your house to show you what respect really means. My stepmother mocked me over the phone. The new buyers move in next week. I just smiled, recalling my secret talk with Dad's lawyer. Good luck with that, I said. She never saw it coming. Can you imagine being told the home you grew up in, the one filled with every single memory of your life, was sold out from under you by the very person who was supposed to be family? And then, having that person sneer down the phone, I sold your house to teach you a lesson about respect. Well, that's exactly what happened to me. But what she didn't know, my father, even in death, had already set the ultimate trap. The house, that magnificent Victorian in Beacon Hill, wasn't just some property. It was the heart of our family. Red brick, black shutters, ornate moldings from 1887, it was a living piece of history. My grandparents bought it for a steal back in the 50s, passing it to my dad, their only child. Every significant moment of my childhood unfolded within those walls. Dad, an architect, loved that house with a passion. He'd walk me through every room, showing me the hand-carved banisters, the original heart pine floors, the intricate plasterwork. Madison, he'd say, they don't make homes like this anymore. This craftsmanship is a lost art. This house is our legacy, Maddie. Someday it'll be yours. My mom, Elizabeth, an interior designer, loved it just as much. Together, they created a haven. The jewel-toned library, the chef's kitchen, the sunroom where Mom nursed her precious orchids. Our perfect world shattered when Mom got her aggressive breast cancer diagnosis. I was 13. For 2 years, our home transformed. Hushed conversations, medical equipment. The sunroom became Mom's sanctuary, a place where she could still feel the sun when she was too weak to go outside. I was 15 when we lost her. Dad and I were utterly devastated. I became withdrawn, talking to Mom's plants in that sunroom as if they could hear me. Dad threw himself into work, often sleeping at his office, unable to face the silence Mom had left behind. For almost 2 years, it was just us, two grieving souls trying to muddle through. Then came the charity gala for cancer research. Dad went to honor Mom's memory, and that's where he met Brenda Campbell. Brenda was everything Mom wasn't. Loud, flashy, always seeking attention. Where Mom was thoughtful and genuine, Brenda was calculated, performative. But she made Dad laugh for the first time in years. And honestly, I couldn't begrudge him that. Not even when she started showing up at our house 3 times a week for dinner. Be nice to Brenda, Dad would plead. She makes me happy, Maddie. So I tried. I really, truly tried. But from the get-go, Brenda made it clear our home wasn't to her taste. This place is so old, she'd sigh, trailing a manicured finger across our antique sideboard. Wouldn't it be nice to update things? Get rid of all this dark wood. Brighten it up. Each suggestion felt like an erasure of my mother. The carefully chosen wallpaper, the clawfoot tub where Mom and I took bubble baths, the cluttered bookshelves filled with Mom's margin notes. When Dad announced their engagement after just 8 months, I forced a smile. I was 17, counting down the days until college would be my escape. Their wedding was lavish, Brenda's choice, not Dad's. He would have preferred something intimate, like his wedding to Mom, right in our backyard garden. Instead, it was a 200-person extravaganza. I stood there, maid of honor, watching Brenda beam at the photographer, not at my father during their vows. After the honeymoon, things changed fast. Brenda started redecorating, room by room, systematically erasing Mom's presence. The antique Persian rugs were out, replaced by modern geometric patterns. Warm colors gave way to stark whites and grays. Family photos were rearranged to prominently feature Brenda, while many of ours, Dad, Mom, and me, disappeared entirely. Dad seemed oblivious, or maybe just grateful not to be alone. When I tried to talk to him, he'd brush me off. Your mother would want us to move forward, Maddie, he'd say. Brenda needs to feel like this is her home, too. But it wasn't just about decor. Brenda began inserting herself between Dad and his friends. The couples who'd been staples at our dinner table for years were suddenly too boring or stuck in the past. Dad's college roommate, who visited every summer, was imposing. My Aunt Carol, Dad's sister, was always criticizing Brenda, though I'd never heard Aunt Carol say an unkind word about anyone. Gradually, our social circle shrank to Brenda's friends and colleagues. Dad seemed to shrink too, deferring to Brenda on matters he once would have handled with confidence. By the time I left for UCLA, as far from Boston as I could get, Dad called me less frequently, always when Brenda was out. Our conversations were rushed, guarded. If I asked about coming home for a weekend, there was always an excuse. Brenda was hosting an event, or remodeling the guest room, or thought it would be better if I visited during scheduled breaks. So I adapted. I spent holidays with friends or with Aunt Carol, who had also been exiled. I focused on my studies, double majoring in architecture and historic preservation, a tribute to both my parents that my father never acknowledged. Still, Dad found ways to maintain our connection. Care packages with notes like, "Don't tell Brenda how much chocolate I sent." Business trips to California that magically aligned with my breaks. During these stolen moments, I saw glimpses of my real father, the one who laughed easily, spoke passionately about his projects, who wasn't constantly checking his phone for Brenda's texts. Then, during my senior year, Dad surprised me, flying out for a weekend alone. "Brenda thinks I'm at a conference in Chicago," he confessed as we walked along Santa Monica Pier. "I needed to see you, Maddie, to talk to you without interference." That day, he asked about my life, my studies, my goals. He was particularly interested in my thesis on adaptive reuse of historic properties. "You have your mother's eye and my technical mind," he said proudly. "The perfect combination." Before he left, he hugged me tighter than usual. "I've made some mistakes, Madison," he said, using my full name as he did when serious. "But I want you to know you are the most important person in my life. Never doubt that." I didn't know then that he was saying goodbye. I didn't know he'd already received his diagnosis. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was working at a historic preservation firm in San Francisco. Aunt Carol's voice was tight with grief and anger. "Your father's sick, Madison. Pancreatic cancer. It's advanced. Doctors are giving him months." The shock hit me physically. My knees buckled. "How long has he known?" I whispered. "At least 6 weeks from what I can gather," she said. "Brenda's been controlling who gets information. I only found out because I ran into James from your dad's firm." I was on a plane that afternoon. During the 5-hour flight, my mind raced, replaying every sign I'd missed. Dad had looked thinner on our last video chat, tired. He'd mentioned stomach pain, blaming Brenda's experimental cooking. When I arrived at the house, my house, our house, though it barely looked the same, Brenda answered the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Madison, what a surprise," she said, blocking the entrance. "We weren't expecting you." "I came as soon as I heard about Dad," I replied, refusing to play her game. "Where is he?" "Your father is resting. The medication makes him very tired. Perhaps you should have called. Is that Maddie?" "Let her in, Brenda." Dad's voice, weak but insistent, came from behind her. She stepped aside reluctantly, and I rushed past her to the downstairs study, now Dad's bedroom. The sight of him nearly broke me. The robust, energetic man who taught me to ride a bike and build model bridges was now thin, jaundiced, his designer clothes hanging loose. But his eyes lit up when he saw me. For a moment, he was just my dad again. "Madison," he said, reaching for me. "My girl, you came." I sat beside him, taking his hand carefully, afraid of dislodging the port in his chest. "Of course I came. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" He glanced at the door where Brenda hovered. "We didn't want to worry you until we had a treatment plan." I bit back my response. There was no we. I knew with absolute certainty that Brenda had deliberately kept this from me, hoping Dad would be too sick to see me by the time I found out. For the next few weeks, I took a leave of absence and moved back into my old bedroom, which Brenda, thankfully, hadn't yet converted to the home gym she'd been planning. I coordinated with Dad's doctors, arranged for a home health nurse, and spent every possible moment with him. Brenda was visibly annoyed by my presence, but couldn't object without seeming heartless. Instead, she asserted subtle control, rescheduling nurse visits, accidentally discarding the soft foods I prepared for Dad, insisting on accompanying him to appointments where she'd speak over us. But she couldn't be there all the time. She had her real estate business to run, social obligations she deemed too important to miss. During those precious hours alone, we reconnected in a way we hadn't in years. "I'm sorry, Maddie. he told me one afternoon as we looked through old family albums I'd rescued from the attic. I let her come between us, between me and everyone who mattered. It's okay, Dad, I said, though we both knew it wasn't. No, it's not. I was weak. After your mother died, I was so lost. Brenda was decisive when I couldn't be, strong when I felt broken. But that strength, it became a wall. I see that now. On days he felt stronger, Dad would ask me to help him to the sunroom, the one space Brenda hadn't completely redesigned. There, surrounded by the offspring of Mom's beloved plants, which the housekeeper had quietly continued to tend, Dad began to have mysterious private conversations with me. I need you to understand something, Madison, he'd whisper, his voice barely audible. Things aren't always what they seem. I've made arrangements to make things right. What kind of arrangements, Dad? I'd ask, but he'd shake his head. Not now. After. You have to promise me you'll meet with Harrison, my attorney, after I'm gone. No matter what happens at the reading of the will. Promise me. I promise, I said, confused but unwilling to stress him. As the weeks passed, Dad grew weaker, and Brenda's attention shifted from his care to his possessions. She started asking pointed questions about his business, accounts, properties. She became fixated on the house. We should discuss selling, Richard, she said one evening, thinking I was out of earshot. This place is too big for me to manage alone. Too many stairs, too much maintenance. We could use the money for your treatments. Dad's insurance covered his treatments, and they both knew it. The house was worth millions. Brenda, who came into the marriage with modest assets, clearly had her eye on the windfall. Not yet, Dad would reply weakly. Let's focus on getting better. But we all knew he wasn't getting better. The treatments had failed, and Dad had decided to stop them. During his final week, Dad insisted on speaking to me alone each day. These conversations were fragmented, jumping between childhood memories and urgent instructions. The oak tree in the backyard, remember how we built that treehouse? Harrison has the papers. Your mother's jewelry is in the safe deposit box. Key in my desk. Harrison knows. Trust Harrison. I nodded, taking notes, unsure what was delirium and what was important. The night before he died, Dad had a moment of perfect lucidity. He gripped my hand with surprising strength, looking directly into my eyes. Madison, I need you to forgive me for Brenda. For the lost years. But know this. I've always loved you more than anything in this world. And I've done everything I could to protect you. Remember that when it seems like I didn't. I held his hand to my cheek, memorizing the feel of it. There's nothing to forgive, Dad. I love you. He died peacefully the next morning, me on one side of his bed, Brenda on the other. In that moment of profound loss, I thought perhaps grief might bridge the gap between Brenda and me. That we might find common ground in loving and missing the same man. I was wrong. While I sat shell-shocked beside my father's body, Brenda was already on the phone with the funeral director, planning a service that would reflect her taste, not Dad's wishes. The funeral was exactly as Brenda wanted it. Elaborate floral arrangements Dad would have found excessive, eulogies from her friends who barely knew him, a reception at an upscale hotel instead of the intimate gathering at home Dad had specified in the notes I found in his desk. Throughout, Brenda played the part of the devastated widow perfectly, accepting condolences with a practiced balance of dignity and visible grief. Yet, I noticed how quickly her expression changed when she thought no one was watching. The tears drying instantly, a look of calculation returning to her eyes as she assessed the attendees, likely cataloging who would be useful to her moving forward. I stood beside her in the receiving line, accepting hugs from Dad's colleagues and friends, many of whom I hadn't seen in years, thanks to Brenda's systematic isolation of my father. Several whispered how glad they were I'd been there for Dad at the end, how much he'd always talked about me with pride, even during the years Brenda had kept us apart. Aunt Carol stayed close, a buffer between me and Brenda's performative grief. Your father adored you, she reassured me repeatedly. Never doubt that, no matter what happens next. I didn't understand what she meant by what happens next, until 2 days later, when we gathered at Mr. Harrison's office for the reading of the will. His office was in a historic brownstone, the kind of place where generations of Boston's legal matters were handled with discretion. I arrived early, needing a moment before facing Brenda again. Mr. Harrison, A tall man in his 60s with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses greeted me with unexpected warmth. "Madison," he said, shaking my hand with both of his. "It's good to finally meet you, though I wish it were under better circumstances. Your father spoke of you often and with great pride." Before I could respond, the door opened and Brenda swept in, dressed in an expensive black suit that screamed, wealthy widow rather than grieving wife. She was with a sharp-featured man, carrying a leather portfolio, introduced as my attorney, Mr. Daniels. The fact that she'd brought her own lawyer suggested she was expecting something contentious. I glanced at Aunt Carol, who had arrived just after me, and she raised an eyebrow. "Shall we begin?" Mr. Harrison said, once we were all seated. He opened a thick folder and cleared his throat. "This is the last will and testament of Richard James Reynolds, revised and signed 6 months ago, with myself and 2 colleagues as witnesses. 6 months ago, just before Dad's diagnosis, if my timeline was correct." Mr. Harrison began with the standard legal preamble, then moved to the specific bequests: Dad's architectural books to his firm, a generous donation to the Cancer Research Foundation established in my mother's name, his vintage car to his oldest college friend. Then came the items that mattered most. "To my daughter, Madison Elizabeth Reynolds, I leave my personal effects, including photographs, my architectural drafting tools, and the family albums." My stomach dropped. Personal effects? That's all. Additionally, to Madison, I leave a cash bequest of $50,000. $50,000 was generous under normal circumstances, but given my father's wealth and our family history, it felt like an afterthought. I could feel Brenda smirk without even looking at her. "The remainder of my estate," Mr. Harrison continued, "including all real property, financial accounts, investments, and business interests, I leave to my wife, Brenda Campbell Reynolds." The words hit me like physical blows. The house, my childhood home, my grandparents' legacy, the place my father had promised would someday be mine to care for, was now Brenda's, along with everything else that defined my father's life and work. How could he do this? After all his mysterious comments about making things right, after all his hints about arrangements and instructions to meet with Harrison. I must have made a small sound of distress, because Aunt Carol gripped my hand tightly. "Are there any questions?" Mr. Harrison asked, looking directly at me with an unreadable expression. Brenda's attorney spoke up. "Everything seems quite straightforward. My client is satisfied with the terms." I bet she was. In 10 minutes, Brenda had gone from a moderately successful real estate agent to a multimillionaire with significant property holdings. "Madison," Mr. Harrison prompted, "any questions?" I wanted to scream, to demand explanations, to ask how my father could have betrayed not just me, but generations of Reynolds who had preserved our family home. Instead, I managed a stiff no. "No questions." "Very well," Mr. Harrison said. "There are papers to sign regarding the transfer of assets. Brenda, my assistant has those ready in the next room. Madison, if you could stay behind for a moment, there are some details regarding your father's personal effects that we need to discuss." Brenda rose, triumphant. "Take all the time you need to discuss knickknacks," she said. "I have more pressing matters to attend to, like deciding what color to paint the living room. I'm thinking white, to brighten up all that dreary woodwork." She swept out with her attorney, leaving me stunned and shaking with both grief and anger. As soon as the door closed, Mr. Harrison's formal demeanor vanished. He crossed to a sideboard, poured a glass of water, and brought it to me. "Drink this," he instructed gently, and then listened very carefully. "All is not as it appears, Madison." I took the water automatically, my mind still reeling. "What do you mean?" "She got everything. The house, the money, everything he worked for." "Not exactly," he said, his voice lowered conspiratorially. He reached into an inner pocket of his suit jacket and withdrew a small envelope. "Your father asked me to give you this privately after the formal reading, and he asked me to tell you that you must meet me tomorrow at 10 a.m. at the Blackbird Cafe on Charles Street. Come alone. Tell no one." I took the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a note in Dad's familiar handwriting. "Madison, what you heard today is not the full story. Harrison will explain everything tomorrow. Trust him completely. Remember what I told you. Things aren't always what they seem. I've made arrangements. I love you more than anything, Dad. I looked up at Mr. Harrison, confused hope beginning to replace my despair. I don't understand. You will, he promised. Tomorrow. For now, play along. Let Brenda believe she's won. It's what your father wanted. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror at the house I thought I'd never see again, except as a visitor at Brenda's mercy. I watched her go inside, already on her phone, likely sharing the news of her windfall. Later that evening, sitting in Aunt Carol's guest room, trying to make sense of the day, I got a text from a high school friend. Just drove by your house. There's a coming soon sign from Brenda's real estate company in the front yard. Is your dad selling? My dad wasn't selling. My dad was gone. And Brenda wasn't wasting any time claiming her prize. The Blackbird Cafe was a small, unassuming spot on Charles Street, a local gem. Dad and I used to come here on Saturday mornings. I arrived 15 minutes early, too anxious to wait. I chose a table in the back corner, positioned to see both the entrance and the emergency exit, a habit from my San Francisco years. Precisely at 10, Mr. Harrison appeared, carrying a weathered leather briefcase. He ordered coffee for us both before sitting down. "Thank you for coming, Madison," he said, his formal tone contrasting with the casual setting. "What I'm about to share with you was planned meticulously by your father over the past year. He wanted to protect you, but he needed to protect himself as well, at least until the end." "Protect himself from Brenda?" I blurted. It wasn't a question. Harrison nodded. "Your father realized too late, I'm afraid, the true nature of his marriage. By the time he understood what Brenda was, he was already trapped in ways that made a simple divorce complicated." "What do you mean, complicated?" "Dad had all the money, all the power in that relationship." Harrison smiled sadly. "Power isn't always about money, Madison. Brenda had gathered quite a collection of compromising information on your father. Business decisions that, taken out of context, could have been portrayed as unethical. Private struggles after your mother's death that could have damaged his reputation. Nothing illegal, nothing truly wrong, but enough that a vindictive ex-wife could have destroyed the firm he'd built over 30 years. I thought about the changes in my father, how he'd become withdrawn, cautious, less the bold, principled man I admired. So he stayed with her, even though he knew she was toxic. He did, but about 18 months ago, he came to me with a plan. He suspected his health was declining, though he hadn't yet received the formal diagnosis. He wanted to ensure that Brenda would be provided for, as he had promised in their marriage vows, but he was determined that she would not be the one to inherit the Reynolds family home. Harrison opened his briefcase and removed a thick folder. "Your father created an irrevocable trust 3 years before he married Brenda. At that time, he transferred ownership of the house to the trust, with himself as the beneficiary during his lifetime, and you as the successor. Beneficiary upon his death." My mind raced to keep up. "But at the will reading yesterday, the will dealt with assets in your father's name at the time of his death. The house was not among those assets, though Brenda never realized this. Your father maintained the fiction that he owned the house, paying for all maintenance and taxes from his personal accounts. The trust arrangement was buried in legal documents that Brenda, despite her business acumen, never thought to investigate." He handed me the folder. "These are copies of all the relevant documents. The house is yours, Madison. It has been, legally speaking, since the moment your father died. Brenda has been living there as an unwitting guest for the past week." I opened the folder with trembling hands. There it was in black and white, the Reynolds Family Trust, with me named as trustee and beneficiary. Additional documents show the transfer of the house to the trust dated 3 years before Dad and Brenda's wedding. But why the charade yesterday? Why let me believe, even for a day, that I'd lost everything? Harrison's expression turned grave. "Your father knew Brenda would fight any direct bequest to you. He feared she might challenge the will, drag you through painful litigation, perhaps even damage the property out of spite if she knew she couldn't have it. He wanted her to reveal her true intentions, which she's done rather spectacularly by immediately putting the house on the market." He reached into his briefcase again and withdrew a sealed envelope. "Your father left this for you as well. He asked that I give it to you only after explaining the trust arrangement." The envelope contained a letter, written in Dad's distinctive architect's handwriting, precise block letters that had labeled so many blueprints. My dearest Madison, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And Harrison has explained the trust arrangement to you. I hope you can forgive the deception. I couldn't bear the thought of Brenda destroying our family home or using it to manipulate you after I was gone. I realized too late the mistake I made in marrying her. By the time I understood who she truly was, I was trapped by circumstances I won't burden you with. But I would not, allow my mistake to rob you of your birthright. The trust arrangement was created before Brenda came into my life, and I kept it hidden from her throughout our marriage. The Reynolds house is yours now, as it always should have been. I know I've disappointed you in many ways these past years. I let Brenda come between us, when I should have fought harder to keep you close. Please know that not a day went by when I didn't think of you, miss you, and feel pride in the remarkable woman you've become. What you do with the house now is entirely your decision. Keep it, sell it, renovate it. The choice is yours, but I wanted you to be the one to decide its fate, not Brenda. There is one more thing. In the master bedroom, behind the reproduction of Monet's water lilies that Brenda insisted on hanging, ghastly thing, there is a small wall safe. The combination is your birthday. Inside, you'll find your mother's jewelry, which I managed to hide before Brenda could modernize those too. Along with some family papers I thought you might want to preserve. I love you, Madison, more than you could ever know. I hope that in protecting this piece of our family history for you, I've begun to make amends for the years we lost. All my love, Dad. Tears streamed down my face as I finished reading. Mr. Harrison discreetly passed me a handkerchief. What happens now? I asked when I could speak again. Now, Harrison said with a small, satisfied smile, we wait for Brenda to attempt to sell property she doesn't own. I've already alerted the title company that will handle any closing. They're aware of the trust's existence, but have been instructed not to reveal anything until Brenda actually attempts to complete a sale. So, she's listing a house she doesn't own? I asked, beginning to understand the elegance of my father's plan. Exactly. She can show it, accept offers, even sign a purchase agreement. But when it comes time to transfer title, she'll discover she has no legal right to do so. The house is yours, Madison. It has been all along. I sat back, overwhelmed by this reversal of fortune. Dad knew her so well, knew exactly what she would do. Your father was a brilliant man, Harrison agreed. And he loved you very much. This was his final gift to you. Not just the house itself, but the satisfaction of seeing justice done. As we finished our coffee, Harrison provided me with the names of several excellent real estate attorneys who could help me navigate the coming confrontation. We agreed I would continue staying with Aunt Carol for the time being, allowing Brenda to proceed with her plans, blissfully unaware of what awaited her. One last thing, Harrison said as we prepared to leave. Your father wanted you to have this, regardless of what you decide to do with the house. He handed me a small velvet box. Inside was a key on an antique silver keychain, engraved with the letter R, the original key to the front door, Harrison explained. Your great-grandfather had it made when the family purchased the house. Your father thought you should be the one to hold it now. I closed my hand around the key, feeling its weight in history. Whatever happened next, this small piece of metal represented a connection to my family that Brenda could never sever. The next 3 months required more patience than I knew I possessed. On Harrison's advice, I maintained a low profile, staying with Aunt Carol and focusing on my work. Meanwhile, I kept tabs on Brenda's activities through a network of family friends and neighbors who had never warmed to her. Mrs. Peterson, who had lived next door for 40 years, called me weekly with updates. She's thrown out all your father's clothes, Mrs. Peterson reported one week. Had a crew come and just cart everything away. Such a waste. Those beautiful suits. Another time, she's painting everything white. Everything. Even the mahogany paneling in the library. It's a crime against architecture. But the call I'd been waiting for came on a Tuesday afternoon in early spring. There is a for sale sign in the yard, Mrs. Peterson said, and a lockbox on the door. She's listing it with her own company. Asking price is $4,500,000. The house was worth at least that in Boston's market, but Brenda wouldn't see a penny of it. I thanked Mrs. Peterson and immediately called Harrison, who confirmed the listing had appeared in the MLS that morning. Now we wait, he said. Let her find a buyer. Let her get all the way to closing. Then we'll address the matter of actual ownership. I followed the listing online, watching as Brenda hosted an open house that drew dozens of potential buyers. The virtual tour showed rooms I barely recognized, sterile white boxes stripped of character and history. She'd removed built-in bookcases, covered original fireplaces with drywall, and replaced the hand-carved newel post on the main staircase with something sleek and modern. Each change felt like a personal assault. Exactly. 2 weeks after listing, the status changed to pending, meaning Brenda had accepted an offer. According to Harrison's sources at the title company, the buyers were a tech executive and his wife relocating from Seattle, prepared to pay the full asking price in cash. That's when Brenda called me. I'd been expecting it, this final twist of a knife, this opportunity to gloat. "Madison," she said when I answered, her voice syrupy with false concern. "I realized I never told you about the house." "What about it?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "I've sold it," she announced triumphantly. "I know how attached you were to that old place, but it was just too much house for one person. The new owners are a lovely couple. They're planning to gut the inside completely. Something about open concept and smart home technology." I gripped my phone tighter but maintained my calm. "I see. Of course, I did set aside a few of your old things from the attic," she continued, her voice dripping with condescension. "Photo albums and such. Nothing valuable, but they might have sentimental worth to you. You can pick them up before closing next week." "That's thoughtful of you," I managed. "I thought so," she purred. "Oh, and Madison, I wanted you to know I sold the house to teach you a lesson about respect. Maybe next time you'll think twice before trying to turn your father against me." My blood boiled at the accusation, as if I'd been the manipulative one. "The new owners move in next week," she continued, clearly enjoying herself. "So if you want to say goodbye to the place, you should do it soon. Though, honestly, you might not recognize it anymore." That's when I allowed myself a small smile, thinking of the documents safely stored in Harrison's office and the key I now wore on a chain around my neck. "Good luck with that," I replied simply. "What's that supposed to mean?" she demanded, her tone shifting from smug to suspicious. "Nothing," I said. "I'm sure everything will work out exactly as it should. Goodbye, Brenda." I hung up and immediately called Harrison. Closing was scheduled for the following week. He promised our legal team would be ready. "Should I be there?" I asked. "Absolutely," he said. "After all, you're the only one who can actually transfer ownership of the property." The week passed in a blur of preparation. Harrison arranged for a court reporter to document the proceedings. We alerted the title company's legal department, who prepared the necessary paperwork to clarify the true ownership. I even had a locksmith make a new set of keys for the front door. The original would remain around my neck, but I might need spares. The morning of the closing, I dressed carefully in a tailored navy suit that projected professionalism and authority. Aunt Carol drove me to the title company's office, squeezing my hand before I got out of the car. "Richard would be so proud of you," she said. "Go get your house back." I met Harrison in the lobby, and together we waited until everyone else had arrived before making our entrance. Through the glass doors of the conference room, I could see Brenda holding court, laughing with the real estate agents and the buyers, a professional-looking couple in their 40s. Papers were spread across the large table, pens at the ready. Harrison and I exchanged a glance and he nodded. It was time. When we walked in, Brenda's smile froze. "Madison, what are you doing here?" "Hello, Brenda," I said calmly. "I believe you're trying to sell my house." The conference room fell silent. All eyes turned to me. Brenda recovered quickly, her smile tightening into something predatory. "Madison is my late husband's daughter," she explained to the confused buyers. "She's having some trouble accepting the sale, but I assure you everything is in order." She turned to me, her voice hardening. "This is highly inappropriate. If you wanted to say goodbye to the house, you should have done it earlier." The male buyer, Jonathan Kelly, looked uncomfortable. "Perhaps we should give you a moment to sort this out." "That won't be necessary," Harrison interjected smoothly, placing his briefcase on the table. "I'm Edward Harrison, attorney for Madison Reynolds, and I'm afraid Mrs. Reynolds is correct. You are indeed attempting to sell property that doesn't belong to you, Miss Campbell." "It's Mrs. Reynolds," Brenda snapped. And the house absolutely belongs to me. Richard left everything to me in his will. We all heard it read. The title company representative, a woman named Ms. Patel, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. We have a copy of Mr. Reynolds' will on file, which does indeed leave his estate to his wife, Brenda Campbell Reynolds. The will addresses assets that were in Richard Reynolds' name at the time of his death, Harrison explained, opening his briefcase and withdrawing a folder. However, the property at 47 Beacon Hill Avenue was not among those assets. He handed a document to Ms. Patel. This is the deed transferring ownership of the property to the Reynolds Family Trust. Dated May 15, 2016, 3 years before Mr. Reynolds married his wife. Ms. Patel examined the document carefully, then nodded. This appears to be in order, but I'll need to see the trust documents as well. Harrison produced another set of papers. The trust designates Richard Reynolds as beneficiary during his lifetime, with Madison Reynolds as successor beneficiary upon his death. Madison is also named as trustee. Brenda's face had gone from confidence to confusion to fury in seconds. This is ridiculous. Richard never mentioned any trust to me. He couldn't have done this without my knowledge. On the contrary, Harrison replied calmly. The trust was established long before you entered the picture, Miss Campbell. Mr. Reynolds had no obligation to inform you of its existence, particularly as it concerned property that was never part of your marital assets. Miss Patel was reviewing the trust documents with increasing concern. These appear to be legally executed and properly recorded with the county. She turned to her computer, typing rapidly. Yes, here it is in the property records. The last transfer of his property was to the Reynolds Family Trust in 2016. Brenda's real estate agent leaned forward. There must be some mistake. We ran title searches before listing the property. You ran a name search for Richard Reynolds, I imagine, Harrison said. But as the property was owned by a trust, not an individual, it wouldn't have appeared in those results. Mrs. Kelly, the female buyer, looked increasingly distressed. What does this mean for our purchase? Ms. Patel sighed. It means that Mrs. Reynolds, Brenda Reynolds, does not have the legal right to sell this property. She is not the owner. This is absurd. Brenda exploded, standing up so abruptly her chair rolled back and hit the wall. Richard and I lived in that house for 5 years. I've been paying the property taxes since his death. Using funds from the estate, I imagine, Harrison noted. Funds that were rightfully left to you, but the house itself was never yours to sell. Brenda turned to me, her carefully maintained facade crumbling to reveal the rage beneath. You knew about this. You. Let me list the house, find buyers, go through this whole process, knowing I couldn't sell it. Yes, I said simply. Just like you knew the house meant everything to me, and still planned to sell it out from under me without a thought. I'll fight this, she threatened, looking around wildly. I'll contest the trust. Richard wasn't in his right mind when he set this up. He was manipulated. Harrison smiled thinly. The trust was established years before his illness, Miss Campbell, and it was witnessed by myself and 2 other attorneys, all of whom will testify to Mr. Reynolds' sound mind and clear intentions. But by all means, pursue litigation if you wish. Discovery would be illuminating, I imagine. The implication was clear. Any legal battle would expose whatever compromising information Brenda had used to control my father. Brenda's face went white, then red. She turned to her real estate agent. Call my lawyer now. While the agent stepped out, Miss Patel addressed the Kellys apologetically. I'm very sorry, but we cannot proceed with this closing. The seller does not have legal title to the property. Jonathan, Kelly looked understandably upset. We've already given notice on our apartment. We're supposed to move in next week. I felt a pang of sympathy for the couple caught in the middle. Mr. and Mrs. Kelly, I said, I apologize for the situation. You should know that I have no intention of keeping you from the home you've chosen. If you're still interested as the actual owner, I would be happy to sell you the property directly. Mrs. Kelly blinked in surprise. You would? Of course. We can discuss terms that would be fair to everyone, except perhaps Miss Campbell's commission, I added, unable to resist the small dig. Brenda's lawyer arrived within 20 minutes, a different attorney than the one who had accompanied her to the will reading. This one was older, with the harried look of someone called away from important work for an emergency. After reviewing the documents, he pulled Brenda aside for a whispered conference in the corner. I couldn't hear the specific words, but the increasingly desperate tone of Brenda's responses told me all I needed to know. Her lawyer was confirming what Harrison had said. She had no legal claim to the house. When they returned to the table, Brenda's lawyer addressed the room. My client needs time to review her options. We request that all parties suspend any further action regarding this property until we've had a chance to examine these documents more thoroughly. Of course, Harrison agreed smoothly. However, I should note that as of this moment, Ms. Campbell is residing in a property owned by Madison Reynolds without permission. Ms. Reynolds would be within her rights to demand immediate vacancy. It was a power move, and we all knew it. Legally, I could have Brenda removed immediately. Brenda's lawyer cleared his throat. We would request a reasonable accommodation to allow my client time to relocate. I thought of all the times Brenda had been unreasonable with me, blocking my visits to see my dying father, disposing of family heirlooms, attempting to sell my childhood home out of spite. I could have been equally vindictive now that the power had shifted. Instead, I said, 2 weeks. She can have 2 weeks to pack her things and find new accommodations, but I'll need access to the house starting tomorrow to assess what renovations will be needed before the Kellys can move in. Ms. Patel, apparently relieved we were moving toward resolution rather than litigation, quickly drew up temporary agreements for everyone to sign, acknowledging the true ownership, setting a timetable for Brenda's departure, and establishing preliminary terms for my direct sale to the Kellys. Throughout this process, Brenda sat rigid with fury, signing the papers with such force she tore through one of them. When the final document was completed, she stood up and addressed me directly. You think you've won, don't you? You have no idea what your father was really like. The things he did, the secrets he kept. He wasn't the saint you think he was. I never thought he was a saint, I replied calmly. He was human. He made mistakes, marrying you being chief among them. But he was a good man who loved his family and tried to protect what mattered. This isn't over, she hissed, gathering her designer person coat. Actually, Brenda, it is, I said, standing to face her. The house is mine. Your game is finished, and in 2 weeks, you'll be nothing but an unpleasant memory in our family history. She stormed out, her real estate agent hurrying after her with apologies streaming from her lips. The Kellys remained, looking shell-shocked. Does this sort of thing happen often in Boston real estate? Jonathan asked weakly. Harrison chuckled. Only when exceptionally devious people meet exceptionally good planning. We spent the next hour discussing terms with the Kellys, who were surprisingly understanding once they realized they could still purchase the house they'd fallen in love with, and at a slightly lower price now that Brenda's commission was out of the equation. As we left the title company, Harrison placed a fatherly hand on my shoulder. Your dad would be proud. You handled that with grace and dignity, more than Brenda deserved. Truthfully, I didn't do it for her, I said, fingering the key that still hung around my neck. I did it for Dad, and for myself. Some battles aren't worth fighting. Not when you've already won the war. The next day, armed with my original key and the legal documents confirming my ownership, I returned to the house that had been my home for 18 years. Brenda's car was gone. Presumably, she was out searching for a new place or consulting her lawyer about non-existent loopholes. I stood on the front steps for a long moment, tracing the familiar pattern of the leaded glass in the door's window. Then, I inserted the key that had been in my family for generations, turned it in the lock, and stepped inside to reclaim my birthright. 2 weeks after the showdown, I stood in the empty foyer, listening to the echo of the front door closing behind Brenda for the final time. She had departed with as much drama as she'd lived, hiring an excessive number of movers, making pointed comments about items she was generously leaving behind, and finally, delivering a sealed envelope she claimed contained the truth about your father. I accepted it politely, waited until she was gone, and then promptly dropped it unopened into the fireplace in the library, one of the few original features she hadn't managed to destroy. Whatever truth Brenda thought would hurt me didn't matter anymore. I had my own truth, confirmed by Dad's actions in his final letter. The house felt simultaneously familiar and foreign. The bones were the same, the grand staircase, The high ceilings, the distinctive crown moldings that had survived Brenda's modernization efforts. But the spirit had been altered by her cold white paint, the removal of built-in bookshelves, the replacement of antique fixtures with trendy modern alternatives. I had sold the house to the Kellys, as promised, but with a contingency that gave me 2 months to live there before they took possession. I needed that time to reconnect with the home, to decide what items to keep, and to oversee the restoration of some of the architectural features Brenda had damaged. My first night alone, I wandered from room to room, reacquainting myself with the spaces that had shaped my childhood. In my old bedroom, now stripped of personality and painted the same sterile white, I could still see the shadows of where my posters had hung, the slight indentation in the window seat where I'd spent countless hours reading. I saved the master bedroom for last. It had been my parents' room, then Dad and Brenda's, and I entered it with a mix of reverence and trepidation. Brenda had completely redesigned the space, replacing the warm cherry furniture with sleek gray and chrome pieces, covering the original hardwood floors with white carpet, and as Dad had mentioned, hanging an oversized reproduction of Monet's water lilies over the fireplace. I carefully removed the artwork, revealing the wall safe, just as Dad had described. My fingers trembled slightly as I entered my birthday, 6/29, into the combination lock. The mechanism clicked, and the door swung open. Inside were several velvet jewelry boxes, a thick manila envelope, and a smaller white envelope with my name, in Dad's distinctive handwriting. I opened the white envelope. My darling Madison, if you're reading this, you've reclaimed your birthright and discovered the safe. Inside, you'll find your mother's jewelry, which she always intended for you to have. The sapphire set was her favorite. She wore it the night we got engaged. The manila envelope contains family papers, including the original deed to the house from your great-grandparents' purchase. There are also some of my private journals, which I hope will help you understand the choices I made, both good and bad. I have one last confession, Madison. In the last years of our marriage, as Brenda became more controlling and I became more ill, I began secretly restoring some of the family heirlooms she thought she had disposed of. Look in the attic, behind the chimney access panel. There you'll find the items I managed to save. Your mother's favorite books, photographs Brenda removed from albums, the hand-carved music box your grandfather made for you. I couldn't save everything, and for that I'm sorry. But I saved what mattered most as I tried in my imperfect way to save what mattered most for you. This house, your inheritance, your future. Live well, Madison. Be happy, and know that wherever I am proud of the woman you've become. All my love, Dad. Tears streamed down my face as I clutched the letter to my chest. Even in his final months, weakened by disease and controlled by Brenda, Dad had been fighting for me in his own quiet way. He hadn't been perfect. His choice to marry Brenda had caused us both pain, but he had done his best to make amends, to protect what he could for me. I opened the jewelry boxes one by one, memories flooding back with each piece. Mom's pearl earrings she wore to every Christmas Eve service, the delicate gold bracelet Dad had given her on their anniversary, and yes, the sapphire set, a necklace, earrings, and ring that matched Mom's eyes perfectly. The manila envelope contained exactly what Dad had promised. Family documents, his personal journals, and photographs I had thought lost forever. I would read the journals eventually, but not yet. Tonight was about reconnection. I made my way to the attic, flashlight in hand, and located the chimney access panel. Behind it, just as Dad had described, was a hidden cache of family treasures. Mom's dog-eared copy of Pride and Prejudice with her notes in the margins, family photo albums spanning generations, the music box my grandfather had carved that still played, Somewhere Over the Rainbow, when wound, my parents' wedding album, Dad's collection of architectural awards. I spent hours in the attic that night, surrounded by these rescued fragments of my family history, alternately crying and laughing as memories washed over me. By the time I descended the stairs, dawn was breaking, and I had made a decision. Over the next 2 months, I threw myself into a careful, selective restoration of the house. I didn't try to erase all of Brenda's changes. Some of her modernizations actually complemented the historic features. But I restored the library's built-in bookshelves, refinished the hardwood floors she had covered, and reinstalled the antique light fixtures I found carefully wrapped and labeled in the basement. The Kellys visited weekly, their initial weariness giving way to genuine enthusiasm as they saw the house's transformation. They had young children who would fill the rooms with laughter again, and they appreciated the blend of historic character and modern amenities I was creating. "We'll preserve the heart of the house," Jonathan promised during their final visit before I moved out. "Our kids will know its history." On my last night in the house, I sat in Dad's study, the one room Brenda had left mostly untouched. I had packed the items I was keeping: Mom's jewelry, the family photographs and documents, Dad's architectural tools, and a few pieces of furniture with special significance. The rest would stay with the house, part of its continuing story. I felt a profound sense of peace sitting in Dad's leather chair, surrounded by his books and the subtle scent of his pipe tobacco that somehow lingered years after he'd given up smoking. The house had been reclaimed, not just from Brenda, but from the grief and distance that had separated Dad and me during his marriage. Through his final act of love and protection, he had restored our connection, even after death. The lesson wasn't lost on me. Dad had made mistakes. We all do. He had allowed fear and manipulation to separate him from those he loved most. But in the end, he had found the courage to make amends, to protect what mattered, to ensure that justice would eventually prevail. I had learned that patience sometimes serves justice better than immediate confrontation, that playing the long game, as Dad had done, can be more effective than impulsive reaction. That forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing, but rather freeing yourself from the burden of bitterness. Most importantly, I had learned that family legacy isn't just about houses or possessions. It's about values passed down, lessons learned, love expressed, even imperfectly. Dad had preserved our family home for me, yes, but more precious was the example he'd set through his final acts, showing me that it's never too late to try to make things right. As the light of dawn filtered through the study windows, I rose from Dad's chair and took one last look around. I wouldn't be living here anymore, but I had reclaimed what mattered: my heritage, my memories, my peace of mind. And Brenda's attempt to erase, all of that had ultimately failed. Sometimes justice comes in unexpected ways. Sometimes the most powerful response to cruelty isn't dramatic confrontation, but quiet, methodical planning. Sometimes winning doesn't mean destroying your opponent, but simply taking back what is rightfully yours and moving forward with grace. As I closed the front door behind me for the final time, I felt Dad's presence beside me, his hand symbolically on my shoulder. "We did it, Dad," I whispered. "We showed her that some things can't be bought, sold, or stolen. Some things are protected by love. What about you? Have you ever had to deal with someone trying to take something that was rightfully yours? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this tale of family justice satisfied something in your soul, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of people standing up for themselves in the face of injustice. Remember to share with anyone who might need a reminder that sometimes the good guys really do win in the end. Thank you for listening. And remember, patience and planning often triumph over greed and manipulation.